Let's talk about it. Hi, everyone. My name is Slu, and I am here with Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
It feels good to be back.
Let's get it.
So a lot has been happening in the country. Polls are out, not the 29 May 2024 polls, but the Brandhurst poll is out, and so is the Ipsos poll. Your initial reaction to the Brandhurst poll? Poll?
So, the Brandhurst poll to me was a little bit, the numbers were quite surprising, right?
Yeah.
So what they said is 39% for ANC, 27% for the DA, 13% for the MK party, 10% for the EFF, IFP 2%, and other 5%. So the one where I'm like, the numbers seem, I think MK, starting there, 13% for the MK seems to me to be very high.
Okay.
Considering the fact that it's a very new party. I don't know if they can. So what they're saying in this poll is that MK will do better than COPE did when COPE was launched. But I don't think that the moment is the same. When COPE was launched, there was a lot of anger about the mega situation.
Yeah.
A lot of people were frustrated about, Zuma coming in, and we saw a groundswell of support, mobilization across the country. I don't think that MK has done the same level of work at this point for us to say that they can not only get higher than COPE, but get into the 10% region. Basically, it's saying that they're going to do as well as EFF did in their second election, in their first election. I don't think that's likely. I think that's too high. Also, I think that this is very high for the Democratic Alliance.
The 27%.
The 27%. Because if you remember what Ipsos said, and we have the Ipsos which came out earlier, the Ipsos did not factor in MK because when they did their survey, MK was not yet, I think it was just launched and they'd done the survey already. They were compiling the data at that point.
Right.
If you remember, MK launched in December. So what they have here, if we just look at the low voter turnout, because last time we had a low voter turnout situation.
Yeah. So,
ANC 46.
Yeah, and the DA is at 21%.
DA is at 21.
EFF at 16.7% and others 16, yeah.
So now look at this, a big discrepancy between 21 and 27.
Sure.
It looks like they put a +6 here so there's two results here that I think I'm a little bit skeptical about. Even the ANC one, to be quite honest with you, at 39%. I think that's really low. Then, in addition, the 10% for EFF, I don't think is realistic. What they're trying to say is that the EFF is going to shrink in size.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that the EFF is going towards the 20% mark. The reason why I'm saying this is because, number one, in between 2019 and now, the EFF has been unified. The EFF has been able to show that they can mobilize numbers and that they can actually mobilize grassroots as well. We saw them do a big event in KwaZulu-Natal. It was full to capacity. They say that the audience in that particular manifesto launch was strictly from the province, that they're not passing people out of the province. So unified leadership means that there's no factional disputes.
Right.
There's no breakaway party or any notable breakaway party. There are some people who've been disgruntled and some people who've been let go. But in the main, the EFF is still the same EFF.
Yeah.
Julius, Floyd, Mbuyiseni, Naledi Chirwa, Asinawo Tambo, Leanne Matthews, you name it. It's the same entity, right? So there hasn't been a big divide for the EFF to go down.
Right.
I don't think that Umkhonto weSizwe voters are coming from the EFF. I think most of them are going to come from the ANC. That's where the Zuma loyalists stayed. When the EFF was formed and when it was growing, it wasn't growing on the back of Zuma loyalists.
Right.
It was growing on the back of young South Africans between the ages of 20 to 35. It was growing on the back of the university moments such as Fees Must Fall. Obviously the Youth League membership, which followed Julius Malema as well. But I don't think that people within the EFF are going to leave the EFF to go to Jacob Zuma. The EFF has got its own energy. It's got its own swagger right now. People who are within the EFF, I think, are staying within the EFF. I don't see people leaving the EFF.
Right.
So that's number one. They've also been focusing a lot on making sure that they have membership drives, that they register members, that they fix their mobilization capacity, which is something that they didn't take as seriously in the 2021 election. And I think the lesson for them was we need to work on our mobilization and make sure that our grassroots are well oiled in terms of the machinery. I think they've been able to do that. So when you then say that they are going to be at 10%, that is at odds with the dynamics on the ground.
Yeah.
And also, while the EFF has maintained its leadership cohort between 2019 and now, what has happened to the Democratic Alliance? It has imploded. It has imploded. 2019 happens, the election happens. Mmusi Maimane leaves Build One South Africa.
Right.
Herman Mashaba leaves same time, Action SA. Bongani Baloyi leaves Tuluva, right? And then you've also had Makashulekana, who left a bit later.
Rise and Zansi. Yeah.
So the DA is having its COPE moment. It's having its EFF breaking away from the ANC moment.
Right.
So it's unlikely that they will get more votes in this election than they did in the previous election where they didn't have these factional issues, right?
Yeah.
Some people love Mmusi Maimane, they're going to vote for him. Some people are unhappy with the exodus of black people because we haven't spoken about all the black people who have left the Democratic Alliance. Phumzile Van Dam, the list is so long, right?
Yeah.
Jonathan, is it Moodley? If you also look at some of the Action SA leaders who are prominent there, who left, Athol Trollip, for example. So many people have left the Democratic Alliance. And also, I don't think that John Steenhuisen has been able to capture the imagination of South Africa the way that Mmusi was able to in 2014. You remember the ANC Isafani campaign?
Yeah.
You remember that? You remember that there was an energy and an excitement about Mmusi. That energy and excitement is simply not there for John.
Do you think that the DA will fall into its position, will still come back into its position of official, being an official opposition
party?
not.
They may not. I think that the Ipsos poll is closer to giving us an indication of where things, although the Ipsos poll here is showing DA, in the page that we're looking at, as remaining as official opposition, right? There are some projections that say the DA could fall to 16, So I actually think the DA is not doing well. I don't think that they're doing well.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they've been able to get black voters back. They've lost black voters. You understand? They didn't just lose white voters, because the analysis now has been that, DA lost voters to Freedom Front Plus. And what they then did was like, okay, if we lost voters to Freedom Front Plus, let us take that right-wing energy and go this way.
Yeah.
We oppose cadre deployment. We oppose affirmative action. We oppose employment equity. We want to have Stellenbosch, the language, the Afrikaans being the language of instruction at the University of Stellenbosch. All of these things speak against what the African community wants and cares about, because affirmative action is there to correct the injustices of apartheid, but it's also there to do so in a way that is cognizant that it wasn't done on the basis of class, it was done on the basis of race, and it has to be corrected, including race as a lens of perspective, because some people did it because they hate blacks. So if you then say, okay, let's check. You see what this happened to me with Bantu. It asked me if I wanted to change I don't know what causes that.
Okay.
All right, I think we're fine.
Yeah.
We're still fine. So when you do that, right, when you ignore the lens of race, some people discriminate exclusively because they don't want black people to live in certain neighborhoods. They don't want black people to get certain jobs. So if you just say we're looking at it in the basis of class, you may find that they will use that as a loophole to say, oh yeah, we found poor whites, we found poor Indians, we found poor colored people, but we don't necessarily have success finding black people who are qualified for this. So sometimes you do need to be specific to say, we want redress for this particular group because this particular group was marginalized because it's hated. Do you understand? Otherwise, how do you account for the fact that some of the people who work and operate within certain structures have animus towards other groups? So when the DA says they oppose these things and then they want to just remove race altogether, I think that they ignore that some people are racists and they operate because they don't like another race. So if you take out that line in the policy and just say, well, just looking at class, because class is a good proxy, you may end up with the same outcomes of that group being excluded because some people don't take the due care that they need to take. So I think the DA is struggling as a result of that. I think they're struggling as a result of that. John is not exciting. Their right-wing policies are alienating a lot of black voters.
Not even writing the letter to the US is helping.
Then you've got the way that it was worded. The way that it was worded was just too much. There's nothing wrong with saying that you want elections to be observed.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with saying that you want free and fair elections.
Okay.
But to be dramatic in the use of language, you know what I mean? To try to undermine the credibility of the institutions such as the IEC simply on the basis of suspicion is aggravating, and it comes across as if you're trying to position yourself to have a narrative after you lose. I think that's why they lost a lot of people. Because people said, no, your story is not making sense. Your story is not making sense, and we don't appreciate the way that you're doing this particular thing.
So your take is Ipsos is closer.
Ipsos
much
is
closer to reality
Ipsos
than
is closer.
Brenthurst.
Yes, of course. There's something else that needs to be discussed.
Sure.
Brenthurst has a conflict of interest.
How so?
Brenthurst has a conflict of interest in this manner, right? Brenthurst Foundation was started by the Oppenheimers. In 2004.
Yeah.
The Oppenheimers also are big donors to the Democratic Alliance. And in fact, Nikki Oppenheimer has a strong relationship with John Steenhuisen. Yeah, they sometimes they go to events together. They'll sit next to each other, right? They have a collegiality and maybe even a strong friendship. So when you produce as the Brenthurst Foundation opinion poll, which seems to favor the Democratic Alliance the most, because the Democratic Alliance here is the only one growing.
Of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they went as far as saying the DA is the only party to increase its share since last year.
Yes, exactly. And there's nothing that indicates the DA has increased their share.
Okay.
You've got Rise, you've got Build, you've got Action SA. How will Build have increased? How will the DA have increased their share? So there's a conflict of interest here. There's a conflict of interest that we need to factor in when assessing this poll. Then finally, we have to look at the methodology, right? The methodology is on page 1.
Yeah.
They say here that, they used random digit dialing methodology. The sample space is 1,506, right? And they did this field work between 12 and 28 February. 15-minute questionnaire. Who right now is doing 15-minute questionnaires on a phone? Who has the time to, one, answer the call, and two, have the conversation?
Right.
Is it a particular LSM? Is it a particular group of people? This may also affect the result in and of itself, that their methodology doesn't actually allow for them to hear from people who would typically vote for the EFF, perhaps, or even people who would vote for the ANC, right? But I don't know where they would then have gotten this 13% MK voters. It just seems to me like...
Because when you mentioned the fact that, there is a conflict of interest, I then wondered, okay, what about the MK party?
Yes. So, this could be, just as a result of the methodology being flawed or leading to an over-representation of some political parties.
Right.
But and maybe the people that they were calling really think that the MK is going to be a threat, and then they were trying to guess how much of a share MK will have. But it's very easy to distort the results of this kind of a sample because of who they were particularly calling. These days, I don't answer. I've got Truecaller. I don't just answer unknown numbers. And I always try to check before I even communicate with the person again, what is the number? And I check it on Truecaller before I move on. So we may be in a situation right now where all of this is as a result of just flawed sampling, or it may be a result of that conflict of interest having a bearing on how the results ended up being the way that they were.
Yeah.
Because the gap between Ipsos and Brenthurst is big.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll find that the Ipsos one will be closer to the reality than the Brenthurst one.
Yeah.
In the last election, Ipsos was relatively accurate.
Mm-hmm.
They were relatively accurate.
Mm-hmm.
They overestimated the ANC.
Mm-hmm.
They overestimated the ANC in their last one because they thought that the voter turnout was going to be higher than it was.
Right.
So even in their low voter turnout scenario, they were overestimating the strength of the ANC, but the voter turnout turned out to be much lower. So that's something that we have to bear in mind. But having said that, I don't think that these. What do you think? Do you think that these numbers, the Brenntest numbers make sense?
Like we rightfully said, the difference is too great between the two polls. But maybe, just maybe, Jamie, Brenntest got the threats that the MK Youth League leader made recently in the media. But yeah, I do think that it's a shock. It's a shock to see MK in the top 5.
Yeah.
I think they still have a lot of work to do on the ground. Yeah. But let's see.
Also, there's something I want to mention here, and then we can maybe close this topic, is that when you look at the issues, if you go to the last page, you see the issues.
Yeah.
Well, this is a 60 pages, just focused on the pages that were of interest to us.
Sure.
The issues here what are the biggest problems facing South Africa? Unemployment, corruption, load shedding, weak leadership, crime, failed political system, and poor policy. Something is missing here. Land. And that also tells me something about the sample space. Because I don't think that you can have land not even hitting 5% or 10% of the big issues. Because the issue of land remains very topical in the townships, in the rural areas, in the African community at large. So for it not to show up in your poll shows me that there's something wrong with your data set, right? The other thing is just that people always talk about unemployment, and I think sometimes you don't see education showing up. But the reason why you have unemployment is because of miseducation, you know? So I think we need to do a better job sometimes of unpacking the relationship between unemployment and crime as well, right? Because those issues are interlinked. But I think because I'm not seeing land here, I'm a bit concerned also about the accuracy of this particular
of the
polling sample, in terms of, is it really representative of everyone? Because I know for a fact that land remains a big debate point and a big political issue.
Yeah.
I mean, EFF was able to get 13% of the electorate just by saying land. It's a big issue.
It's a big question that remains unanswered.
And it's heavy on people's hearts. It's a big issue. Even the ANC in the last election had to try to find ways to say, we're going to do this and we're going to do that because we understand how important the land issue is.
Sure. So these are the only 2 polls that we are looking at. Yeah. And I'm guessing we're going to keep a very close eye on them.
We're going to keep it close. And we'll come back because it's important for us to know
it is
in the South African space, how do these polls actually turn out? It's unfortunate, though, that we don't have as mature of a polling industry as other countries, because you would have so many polls if we're in America. This is a large population, 60 million. It's Africa's #1 economy by many people's counts, right? And in terms of qualitatively, it's definitely the #1 economy. Industrialization, political system maturity, etc., financial system maturity. So you would expect that in such a critical election, we would have more than 2 polls to really look at and dissect. Because if one of these is a little bit off, and sometimes, Nate Silver is one of the polling gurus in the world. He always talks, or he used to talk about, he does not on that show anymore, about over-reliance on one poll.
Yeah.
And I think, one poll in and of itself can be a little bit off. And I think, to be honest with you, my conclusion about the Brenntest poll, it's a little bit off.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to wait and see. Ipsos Brenntest, who is much closer to reality.